Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the nuts and bolts of American government. We're exploring Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution.
That's right, the blueprint for Congress.
Exactly. And it's the longest part of the Constitution, really detailed. Our mission today is to sort of unpack why it's structured this way, why the framers put it first, what they were thinking historically, its strengths, and, how it holds up today. Because the big question, I think, is whether Congress is still really the first branch they intended.
And that's a crucial point, putting Article I right at the start. That wasn't just about organization. It was a statement.
A philosophical one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It underscored their intention, their profound belief, really, that Congress should be the main center of federal power, the first branch.
Right.
Its job description is huge. Organizing the other branches, raising money, declaring war, making all the laws deemed necessary and proper.
Yeah.
It's vast.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit more. Why did they start with Congress? Why give the legislative branch so much detail right up front? What was the thinking there?
Well, it reflects a really deep commitment to the idea that government power comes from the people. Consent of the governed, straight from the Declaration of Independence.
Okay.
So the legislative branch, the part most directly elected by the people, was meant to be the main engine. But, and this is important, they were also wary of giving it too much power. So it was constrained right from the start.
So it's about putting power with the people's representatives, but with guardrails.
Precisely. And to really get why they built it this way, with those specific guardrails, we need to look at what they were running from.
Ah, right. The Articles of Confederation. What was so bad about that system that made them scrap it and start over?
Well, bad might be an understatement. The Constitution's very existence is basically a response to the failures of the Articles. That whole period, starting around 1781, it set up a very weak central government. It was a unicameral Congress, essentially a loose league of states. The preamble, form a more perfect union. That's a direct nod to fixing those problems.
Yeah.
Under the Articles, Congress, it just didn't have teeth. It commanded little respect and no support from state governments. It couldn't enforce its own decisions, couldn't tax directly, couldn't make states follow treaties.
Wow.
Yeah. States often just ignored requests for money, even to pay off Revolutionary War debts. People were warning about bankruptcy, even dissolution of the whole country.
So no real power to act nationally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It highlighted this paradox. Focusing too much on state sovereignty made the central government too weak to function. And that weakness had real economic consequences. The government couldn't regulate trade effectively, nationally or internationally. States had their own conflicting rules, trade barriers between them.
Wow.
A total mess. Think about Britain restricting trade with the West Indies, or Spain closing the Mississippi. America couldn't negotiate effectively. This economic chaos wasn't just inconvenient, it was seen as an existential threat. It was a huge practical reason for the Constitutional Convention. They needed a legislature with real power over taxing and commerce.
Okay, so they know they need something stronger. But here's the tricky part, right? How do you build that stronger legislature without just creating a new kind of tyranny, the very thing they fought a war to escape? That sounds like walking a tightrope.
It absolutely was. They were deeply, deeply concerned about government overreach. James Madison put it bluntly. The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judicial, in the same hands may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny.
Strong words.
Definitely. So their solution wasn't simple. They looked to thinkers like Montesquieu and came up with this idea of separating powers.
Executive, legislative, judicial.
Right. 3 distinct branches, each with its own job description, its own rules. And then, crucially, they added checks and balances.
Like the veto.
Like the presidential veto, exactly. But then Congress gets a check on that, the ability to override the veto with a supermajority, 2/3 in both houses.
Ah, okay.
It's this ingenious design. Give the federal government real power, but split it up, constrain it. Madison's famous phrase captures it. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition.
I see. Let the branches keep each other in line.
That was the theory. But figuring out the legislative branch itself was a huge fight at the convention.
The Virginia plan versus the New Jersey plan.
That's the one. The Virginia plan, pushed by the bigger states, wanted a 2-house legislature bicameral with representation based on population in both houses. And importantly, it wanted Congress to be able to legislate directly for individuals, not just states.
And the smaller states.
They backed the New Jersey plan. They wanted to basically just tweak the articles, keep 1-house unicameral with equal votes for each state, federal power over individuals, only with state consent.
High stakes.
It's extremely. John Dickinson from Delaware apparently said the small states would sooner submit to a foreign power than lose their equal vote in Congress.
Wow. So how did they bridge that gap?
With the Great Compromise, or the Connecticut Compromise, sometimes called. It gave us the system we have now.
Which is?
A House of Representatives, based on population, that satisfied the large states. And a Senate with 2 senators for every state, regardless of size. That addressed the small state concerns.
So a mix of both plans.
Exactly. They saw it as a kind of double security diffusing power, making it harder for any one faction to dominate. But it also baked this fundamental tension, this constant negotiation, right into the structure. It was designed to be slow, deliberate, to force compromise.
Okay, so this compromise gives us the House and the Senate. Let's break that down. How are they actually set up? What are the differences in their day-to-day functions and, their specific powers?
Right. Article I lays this all out pretty clearly. Section 2 deals with the House. It's designed to be closer to the people, more immediately responsive.
2-year terms, right?
Exactly. Members chosen every second year by the people. You have to be 25 years old, a citizen for 7 years, and live in the state you represent. Seats are divvied up based on the census every 10 years.
And unique powers.
A House has the sole power of impeachment. That means bringing the charges. And critically, all bills for raising revenue, tax bills, have to start in the House.
Okay.
And the Senate, Section 3.
Section 3, yes. The Senate was conceived as more deliberative, more stable. You get 2 senators per state.
Longer terms.
Much longer. 6-year terms, and they're staggered, so only about a third are up for election every 2 years. Originally, state legislatures picked them.
But that changed.
It did. The 17th Amendment in 1913 switched it to direct popular election. A big shift reflecting, evolving ideas about democracy.
And the requirements are tougher.
A bit. You have to be 30 years old, a citizen for 9 years, and live in your state. The vice president presides over the Senate, but only votes to break a tie.
And there are special jobs. The Senate has the sole power to try all impeachments. Conviction takes a 2/3 vote. They also provide advice and consent on presidential appointments, cabinet members, judges, and they ratify treaties.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap the main differences. House versus Senate.
Sure. So members, House by population, Senate 2 per state, term length. House 2 years, Senate 6, minimum age. House 25, Senate 30, citizenship. House 7 years, Senate 9, election. House direct, Senate now direct 2, but originally state legislatures. Unique powers. House starts money bills, impeaches. Senate tries impeachments, confirms appointments, ratifies treaties.
Got it. That's a complex structure born from compromise. But despite all that, what makes Article I actually work? What are its enduring strengths as a framework for governing? It's lasted over 2 centuries.
I think its real strength lies in that balance we talked about. It gives the federal government enough power to actually function, but it builds in limits to prevent abuse.
How so? What are the key features?
Well, first you have the enumerated powers in Article 1, Section A. This is basically Congress's job list. It's specific.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Sure. The power to lay and collect taxes, to borrow money, to regulate commerce, both foreign and interstate, to declare war, to raise and support armies, set up post offices, protect patents, and copyrights. It's a pretty comprehensive list.
So it defines what Congress can do.
Exactly. But then right at the end of that list, you get Clause 18, the Necessary and Proper Clause.
Ah, the elastic clause.
Right, sometimes called that. It gives Congress the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. Now, it's not a blank check. It has to be tied to one of the listed powers.
But gives flexibility.
Huge flexibility. It allows Congress to adapt, to use means the framers couldn't have imagined to achieve the goals they did list. It lets the Constitution breathe, It ensures Congress can use all appropriate means for its job. It's been central to how federal power has evolved.
Okay, so defined powers plus flexibility. What else?
Bicameralism itself, having 2 houses. It forces more deliberation, represents different interests, the immediate pulse of the people in the House, more long-term stability and state interests in the Senate. It acts as an internal check.
It slows things down.
Intentionally. That cumbersome design, as you called it, was meant to prevent hasty laws, to force compromise, to build broader consensus. Friction by design.
And other safeguards?
Absolutely. The whole lawmaking process is a safeguard. A bill has to pass both houses in identical form, then go to the president, who can veto it, then potentially back to Congress for an override. It's an obstacle course.
Forces negotiation.
Right. And then there's impeachment. The House can charge federal officials, including the president or judges, and the Senate holds the trial. It's the ultimate check on abuse of power within the government itself. Plus, each house can judge its own elections, set its own rules, even expel members. Accountability mechanisms.
That sounds like a pretty robust framework. But, nothing's perfect, especially something hammered out through so much compromise. And back in the 1780s, what are the flaws? The bad and the ugly baked into Article 1.
You're right, it's definitely not perfect. There are provisions and consequences that reveal deep flaws, some rooted in, frankly, terrible compromises.
Like the slavery issue.
Exactly. The most glaring example is the 3/5 compromise in Article 1, Section 2. It mandated counting 3/5 of all other persons. That was the coded language for enslaved people, for purposes of representation in the House and for direct taxes.
A deal between North and South.
Essentially, yes. Southern states wanted to count enslaved people fully to boost their political power. Northern states argued they shouldn't be counted at all since they couldn't vote. This compromise was the ugly middle ground.
And its impact?
Immediate and profound. It gave Southern states significantly more clout in the House and the Electoral College than their voting populations warranted. And the long-term fallout, well, it wasn't just a political deal. It basically wrote racial inequality into the Constitution's DNA. It acknowledged slavery, accommodated it, and arguably emboldened the pro-slavery faction. Historians point to its influence on things like the 1800 election, the Missouri Compromise, even the Indian Removal Act. It absolutely foreshadowed future conflicts, leading straight towards the Civil War.
And even after the Civil War and the 14th Amendment technically got rid of the 3/5 counting, did that legacy just disappear? It sounds like that initial imbalance would have lingering effects.
Oh, absolutely. The legacy persisted. Things like grandfather clauses, poll taxes, literacy tests, and significantly gerrymandering were all used for decades afterwards to suppress the black vote and maintain white political dominance, particularly in the South. It's a stark reminder of how a pragmatic political compromise at the founding carried immense, enduring moral and social costs.
A heavy legacy. What about other flaws in the design itself? You mentioned deliberation, but can that become a problem?
It certainly can. The very features designed for deliberation, bicameralism, checks and balances, can, and often do, lead to legislative gridlock, inefficiency.
Especially when parties are divided.
Especially then. Getting agreement from the House, the Senate, and the President can be incredibly difficult. And then you have Senate rules, like the filibuster.
Right, the 60-vote requirement.
Exactly. It allows a minority, sometimes just one senator, to hold things up indefinitely unless you can get 60 votes to break the filibuster. It used to be rare, a tool for exceptional circumstances. Now, it's almost routine.
So deliberation becomes deadlock.
Frequently. It really challenges the framers' assumption that, for virtue and good sense would ultimately prevail over pure partisanship. Modern ideological rigidity makes that compromise much harder.
Are there explicit limits on Congress in Article 1 too, besides the structure?
Yes, definitely. Article 1, Section 9 lays out things Congress cannot do. Crucial safeguards. Many were direct responses to British actions.
Such as?
Well, the Slave Trade Clause, it barred Congress from banning the importation of enslaved people before 1808, another grim compromise. But also protections like habeas corpus. The government can't just lock you up indefinitely without cause, except maybe during rebellion or invasion.
Important rights.
Fundamental. It also prohibits bills of attainder laws declaring someone guilty without a trial, and ex post facto laws making something illegal after you've already done it. It limits direct taxes, though the 16th Amendment later allowed income tax. It prevents taxes on exports from states and favoring one state's ports over another. It requires public accounting of government spending, and it forbids titles of nobility and restricts officials from taking gifts or titles from foreign powers without consent, all aimed at preventing corruption and ensuring loyalty.
Okay, so we've got this 18th century document, brilliant in some ways, flawed in others, born of compromise. Fast forward to the 21st century. How is Article I actually functioning now? Are those original principles holding up against modern pressures?
That is really the core question today. And Article I is facing some immense challenges. Political dynamics have shifted, the balance between the branches is arguably different, and courts are constantly reinterpreting it.
You mentioned gridlock already. That seems like a big one.
It is. The hyperpartisanship we see today often paralyzes the legislative process. Fewer major laws get passed, but when they do, they tend to be huge, sweeping changes, often pushed through on narrow party line votes. And as we discussed, the filibuster in the Senate is a major factor, turning that intended deliberation into pretty frequent stalemate.
And what about the balance with the president?
That's another huge area of tension. There's a definite trend towards presidents using executive orders, regulations, and other unilateral actions to make policy, sometimes seeming to bypass Congress altogether.
Even when their own party controls Congress.
Sometimes, yes. Things like withholding funds Congress appropriated or changing foreign policy commitments unilaterally. It raises serious questions about whether Congress is effectively pushing back, whether that Madisonian idea of ambition counteracting ambition is working as intended between the branches.
And the courts, how do they fit into this modern picture of Article 1?
The judiciary, especially the Supreme Court, plays a massive role through judicial review. They interpret what Article I actually means in practice. And that interpretation isn't static, it swings back and forth.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. Look at the Commerce Clause. Congress has power to regulate interstate commerce. In 1995, in United States v. Lopez, the court limited that power, striking down a federal law about guns near schools, said it didn't substantially affect interstate commerce.
Oh, get a limit.
But then in 2005, in Gonzalez v. Raich, the court swung back, upholding federal power to ban local marijuana use, even if state law allowed it, because of its potential aggregate effect on the national market. More expansive.
So back and forth.
Exactly. And the Affordable Care Act case in 2012, NFIB v. Sebelius, was fascinating. The court upheld the individual mandate, but not under the Commerce Clause. They said Congress can't compel commerce. They upheld it under the taxing power instead, and they limited Congress's spending power related to Medicaid expansion. Then you have U.S. v. Comstock in 2010 giving a broad reading to the Necessary and Proper Clause, while Murphy v. NCAA in 2018 pushed back, saying Congress can't commandeer state legislatures.
So the meaning of Congress's power is constantly being debated and redefined by the courts.
Precisely. It means the practical scope of Article I is always in flux, leading to uncertainty and ongoing fights over federal authority.
That dynamic is clear. But let's shift back to representation itself. You mentioned the legacy of things like gerrymandering. How are the very mechanisms designed to connect Congress to we the people being challenged today? Is that connection getting weaker?
That's a really critical question. Gerrymandering is a prime example, drawing congressional district lines specifically to benefit one party over the other. It creates these bizarrely shaped districts.
The salamander shapes.
Right. And it leads to wasted votes, either packing opponents into one district or spreading them thinly across many. It directly affects Article I, Section 2 representatives chosen by the people. It can dilute voting power, make elections less competitive, and push candidates towards party extremes because they only fear a primary challenge.
And the courts haven't stepped in.
On partisan gerrymandering, the Supreme Court basically said in Rucho v. Common Cause in 2019 that it's a political question for states and Congress to solve, not the federal courts. So it continues, potentially leading to legislatures that don't really reflect the overall popular vote.
Okay, gerrymandering distorts the lines. What about money?
The other big distorting factor, the influence of money in politics, especially after the Citizens United decision in 2010.
That's the one about corporate spending as free speech.
Exactly. The Supreme Court ruled that political spending by corporations and unions is protected speech under the First Amendment. This opened the floodgates for super PACs.
Unlimited spending.
Unlimited independent spending. It's dramatically increased the amount of outside money flowing into elections, giving wealthy donors and special interests potentially huge influence. There are ongoing concerns about transparency, so-called dark money groups that don't disclose donors, and whether campaign finance laws, like rules against coordination, are effectively enforced by the FEC.
So does this shift who representatives are listening to?
That's the fear. By equating massive spending with speech, the system might be tilting away from we the people and becoming more responsive to we the donors. It raises fundamental questions about the nature of representation article I was designed to ensure.
Wow. Okay, what a journey through this foundational piece of the Constitution. We've seen how Article I came out of the failures of the articles, how it was meticulously designed with these checks and balances, but also how it carried deep flaws from the start and now faces these really intense modern challenges. It kind of makes you wonder, like you said, if Madison saw Congress today, would he see ambition counteracting ambition or just ambition creating paralysis?
It's a sobering thought. But Article I is still the cornerstone. Its role in fixing the articles is undeniable. The framers' design, aiming for deliberation, diverse representation, accountability, that structure is still there. The ideal of Congress as the first branch, closest to the people, remains powerful. But yes, we have to grapple with the full picture. The 3/5 compromise is a permanent stain, a reminder of the moral costs of political necessity. And today, Hyperpartisanship, the push and pull with the executive, the ever-shifting judicial interpretations, the distortions from gerrymandering and campaign finance. It's a constant struggle between that original framework and today's realities.
So for those of us listening, trying to make sense of it all, what's the takeaway?
I think the takeaway is that Article On's story isn't finished. Its resilience is remarkable, but its effectiveness depends on continuous effort. It requires civic engagement from all of us and adaptation within the institution itself. The health of Congress and really American democracy hinges on whether its members, and we the people, can navigate these massive complexities, find ways to compromise again, and make sure that this first branch truly serves and represents everyone in this incredibly diverse nation.
So as we finish up, let's leave you with this thought, going back to Madison in Federalist 51. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. We've talked a lot about how that's embedded in Article 1, thinking about Congress today, the gridlock, the role of the president, the courts, money, districting. How effectively do you think ambition is counteracting ambition right now? And what does your answer imply for the future of American democracy? Something to think about.